Hi, welcome to Jewish Museum Milwaukee Museum Moments. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I am the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. And each week we try and take on a theme, or each session we try and take on a theme and explore and talk about what it means and how this is connected to Jewish life in Milwaukee or broader Jewish life. And this week you see the title there, Jewish Death and Burial. It's kind of not our normal topic. I mean, normally we're looking at things that are lively and, life affirming on some level and really exploring kind of community in our city. But this one's important, and it's something that it reflects on kind of a bigger theme that we're exploring this week. This week, we are privileged to be able to present a virtual tour of Greenwood Cemetery, which is one of the oldest cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries in Milwaukee. And what our thought was, you know what? Maybe it's kind of interesting to start this exploration. And as my intern Emma was working on this project for me this week or in the past month, we decided probably there's so much here that we're going to have to do a second session as well. So this is our starting point today. Now, one thing that's a little bit challenging is generally, as my regular viewers will know, I like to put up some images. I like to have lots of pictures of how this impacts Jewish Milwaukee, and there are not a lot of pictures to put with Jewish death and burial. So know that we're talking through some themes. I have some quotes, but this is a much more kind of less visual, more auditory experience today. With that said, let me turn over into my slideshow here. So when someone dies, there are these kinds of immediate things that happen. And I think this was put into sharp relief recently with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because there were several things that were a little unusual in her death. Generally, one of the kind of big tenets of Jewish death and burial is that it needs to happen as quickly as possible. And in her case, she was in state at the Supreme Court, and then she also lay in state. She was the first woman, and I believe also the first Jewish person to lay in state at the Capitol. Neither of which kind of jive with the sense of the immediacy of Jewish burial. And she actually was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, which is not a Jewish cemetery. So it's interesting. I'm not sure exactly which of these kinds of obligations were fulfilled or not, but this is something to note, and was certainly something that a number of Jewish sources were exploring and thinking about in this kind of big national moment around RBG's death. When you die, you're Jewish, you're going into this kind of quick resolve as a family to try and connect with family to get people in, but also behind the scenes, your funeral home, your synagogue are really working to maintain this process that has gone on for millennia of making sure that the person is ready to go to their next step. In Jewish life cycle, there are kind of four big stages, birth, which is around circumcision and baby namings. There's bar and bat mitzvah, there's weddings, and then there's death. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is stuff that happens behind the scenes, that as a family, in mourning, that you're not going to see any of this. It just happens for you. So the Hevra Kadisha, which means literally holy society, is a group of people who come together to ensure that the body receives tahara, ritual purification, and to ensure that Jewish funeral practices are met. And they also act as a way of educating the broader community. Now, in Milwaukee, the Hevra Kadisha obligations were carried out pretty much by congregations until the 1970s, which meant that each congregation in town had a set of volunteers who was working to make sure that this ritual purification was met and that they were doing this hard work. And I think it's a really interesting statement that, in the 1970s, it was clear that some of the congregations weren't going to be able to continue to support this practice. And it was so important within the community that the community came together pretty much, it's my understanding, under the leadership of Rabbi Tversky on the West Side, to say we need to ensure that we are taking care of our deceased and in accordance to Jewish law, and we need to make sure that there is a group of people available. So since the 1970s, a group of people have come together under the auspices of Milwaukee Hever Kadisha. It's now called Milwaukee Hever Kadisha Inc. And there are about 80 volunteers who ensure that when someone dies and is going into a Jewish burial, that they receive this ritual purification and that everything is done in accordance to Jewish law. What I will also say about this is, and I think this is Karen Torum, who is a beloved educator in the community, makes this great statement about Jewish burial. When you bury a Max Carl, who is the leader of MGIC and a major Milwaukee philanthropist and leader for many years, and a pauper from the streets, they wear the same kind of shroud. We wrap them in shrouds that have no adornment. That there is a little bit of a democracy in death. That it doesn't matter if you are the biggest leader, the biggest star, the biggest celebrity, or you're someone who is anonymous and has no following, that you're going to get the exact same treatment. And in terms of the actual practices, they're the same. There isn't a lot of adornment in Jewish funerals. And in fact, I found one website which talks about Jewish funerals and burials as being green, just because so much of the process is designed to get you back to a dust-to-dust setting that you're supposed to be decomposing as quickly as possible. This is an article from 1995 from the Journal Sentinel, and there was another line in that that I really appreciated, and he breaks down some of these pieces. He says, about this group of incredible volunteers, they are volunteers who are called from their homes and jobs to funeral homes. They take time to care for people they don't know, receive nothing in return, and are part of a ritual that goes back thousands of years. They participate usually at a time in an ancient rite of purification in which they address the dead person by name, offer prayers, and pour buckets of water over the body. This is a tahara, and women administer to women and men to men. And it is really, this is the process that is undergone. And it's a process that, again, is entirely volunteer driven and volunteer led. And what I will say is that now they receive a small compensation. It's like $36. Most of the people who are doing this choose to designate that to charity in the community as well. So it really is remarkable. I had the privilege this morning of talking to Alan Borsick, who is the current chair, the longstanding president of the Milwaukee Hever Kadisha Society. And he made this statement in an article from the Jewish Chronicle: when I leave a tahara, I almost always feel I've done something good, gentle, a sensitive team. And he remarked to me that there was something spiritual about it, that is not for everybody. Not everybody can go in and be with a body after it has died. But for those who can, that there's this real sense of giving back. And in accordance with Jewish tradition, this is seen as being one of the highest levels of mitzvot, of commandments, because it is something that the person who it's being done to can never return the favor to you. People do this in a 3-person team, the tahara, the washing of the body, and 2 wash while the others fills buckets with water. Every part of the body is washed, and then they wash in very much a structured standpoint. First the right, then the left. In Jewish funerals and burials, there is no embalming fluid or cosmetics, and everyone is dressed in a simple shroud. So in terms of there is actually some physical labor that goes into this, between carrying water and lifting the body and putting on a shroud and putting them into a casket. So there are some of those pieces which are, they take a little bit of time and energy, but it feels like this is one of those things that if people can commit to it, it really is one of those incredible moral moments. On top of that, Jewish funerals tend to happen as quickly as possible. And this goes back to a portion of Deuteronomy. Now, the first part of this commandment is that if someone commits a capital offense, you should stake them. They should be killed and then put on a stake. But then the second part of this commandment, and the part of the commandment that clearly is in more popular effect today, is that you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him in the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So this idea that a body needs to be put back in the ground as quickly as possible is pretty central to Jewish values. And a lot of times you will see that as soon as a family can gather, with in 1 or 2 days, that they try and bury a Jewish person. Caskets are plain wood. You don't see a lot of embellishment. You're going to, and actually on top of that, the casket can't have any metal screws or nails in it. It needs to be, incredibly simple. And the wood, the part of it that needs to be wood is incredibly important because you want this to be able to be decomposed at some point. You don't want anything that's going to stay in the earth. All of this is part of that kind of process of saying that when the Messiah comes, everything can come back together. And within this, once the burial happens, that's when the period of Shiva really begins. And so to that point, you're in a different stage of mourning. Once the burial happens, then you take 7 days to process and to think about this. So this is a starting point on complex rituals with complex statements and thoughts and lots of different actions. What I will say is that I was intrigued by learning more about the Milwaukee Havre Kadisha Society, and would say if anybody's interested in taking action here and being involved in their work and helping out, that they're interested in volunteers. As Alan said, this is the quietest organization in town. They go all over the state. They do all kinds of work for all sorts of different types of Jews, and yet no one really knows about them. The other thing that's kind of interesting from a Milwaukee standpoint is that, according to his sources, there are more Jewish people in Milwaukee who have tahara because 6 of the 8 Jewish cemeteries in Milwaukee require tahara in order to be buried there. So they connect with all of the different funeral homes to ensure that the people who are being buried in these Jewish cemeteries receive the proper purification. If you're interested in getting involved in Milwaukee Havre Kadisha, please feel free to message Jewish Museum Milwaukee and I will get you in touch with them. Thanks so much for sharing this moment with us. Thank you, as always, to Robin Cohen, who has invested in this program. We appreciate that investment. If you would like to invest in Jewish Museum Milwaukee, go to jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. On Thursday, I'm going to be joined by past museum president Penny Descher to talk about her program of taking pictures of all of the grave sites in the state. So keep with us in this morbid week. We appreciate you and have a great day.